They said the scarred ones carry death in their skin, and for years I believed them. But on the night I stumbled into that ancient cave, trembling and ready to surrender to the cold, I discovered that the only creatures willing to make room for me were the ones the village feared most. My name does not matter anymore. The fire took it along with everything else when I was 17, leaving me with a face half melted by flame and a soul hollowed out by grief. I remember the smoke more than the heat, the way it filled my lungs and blinded my eyes as I crawled through the burning wreckage of my family's home. I remember my mother's voice calling my name, then going silent. I remember the beam that fell across my arm and shoulder, pinning me to the floor while the flames kissed my cheek with a hunger that would mark me forever. When the villagers finally pulled me from the ashes, I was the only one left. My parents, my grandmother, my little sister with her braids and her gap-toothed smile, all of them had been taken by the fire. And I, the scarred survivor, became a living reminder of everything they had lost. The villagers who once brought bread to my grandmother's cabin now crossed the road when they saw me coming. Children were pulled behind their mothers' skirts. Doors closed before I could knock. Merchants refused my coin. Temple keepers turned their eyes away when I tried to pray. I became a ghost haunting the edges of their world, surviving on herbs I gathered from the forest floor and the silence I had learned to wear like armor. My grandmother had taught me the old ways before she died, the healing plants and the sacred songs, and I used that knowledge to keep myself alive in a world that wished I would simply disappear. That winter was the cruelest I had known in all my 22 years. The snow came early and fell without mercy, burying paths and freezing the river where I collected water. The wind howled through the mountains like a wounded beast, and the temperature dropped so low that birds fell dead from the sky. My small cabin at the forest's edge groaned under the weight of ice, its old timbers creaking and splitting in the cold. I stuffed rags into the cracks and burned everything I could spare, but the chill crept in anyway, settling into my bones like a patient predator. When the great storm announced itself with winds that screamed through the pines and snow that fell so thick I could not see my own hands, I knew I could not stay. The roof would not hold through the night. I could hear it bowing, feel the walls trembling with each gust. So I wrapped myself in every cloth I owned, took my grandmother's herb pouch, and walked into the white fury, searching for the caves she had spoken of in the stories she told me as a child. Sacred places, she called them, where the old spirit still lingered and the mountain itself offered shelter to those pure of heart. I found the cave by accident, or perhaps by something older than accident. My legs gave out near a ridge I did not recognize, my strength finally failing after hours of fighting through snowdrifts that reached my waist. When I crawled forward through the snow, my hands numb and clumsy, they met stone instead of earth. The opening was narrow, hidden by a curtain of icicles that glittered like teeth in the fading light, but the air that breathed out from within was warmer than the death that waited outside. I pushed through, scraping my shoulders against rock, tearing my cloak on jagged edges, and collapsed onto a floor of dry leaves and ancient dust. For a long moment, I simply lay there, gasping, feeling the warmth wrap around me like an embrace. The sound of the storm faded to a distant moan, and in the sudden quiet, I became aware of another sound. Breathing. Slow, deep, and very close. I lifted my head and looked into a pair of amber eyes that glowed like lanterns in the darkness. He was enormous, larger than any wolf I had seen in my life, larger even than the great hunting dogs the wealthy merchants kept in the southern cities. His fur was the color of moonlight on fresh snow, thick and luminous, seeming almost to glow with its own inner light. A scar ran across his muzzle, deep and old, a raised ridge of pale tissue that spoke of battles survived and pain endured. His shoulders were broad, his legs powerful, his presence so overwhelming that for a moment I forgot to breathe. And there, pressed against the warmth of his body, 3 small shapes slept in a pile of white fur and twitching paws. Pups. His pups. I understood then what I had stumbled upon. This was the Lycan King the elders whispered about, the guardian spirit of the forest who had walked these mountains since before the village had a name. The legend said he was as old as the stones themselves, a creature of the old world who remembered when humans first came to these valleys. They said he once had a mate, a silver wolf whose howl could calm storms and whose eyes held the wisdom of ancient rivers. But she had been taken by hunters 3 winters past. The men had boasted about it in the tavern, drunk on mead and their own cruelty, laughing about the white pelt they sold to a merchant from the south. The great wolf had raised their young alone ever since, a widowed king protecting what remained of his bloodline in the sacred caves where humans feared to tread. I should have fled. Every story I had ever heard told me to run from such creatures, to fear their teeth and their wildness and the ancient hunger that dwelt in their kind. But I was so tired, so cold. My body had nothing left to give, and my spirit had been empty for so long that I no longer remembered what it felt like to hope for anything. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere in all the world that wanted me. So I did the only thing I could do. I asked. My voice came out cracked and small, barely more than a whisper, rough from the cold and the tears I had not yet shed. "Can I sit here with you? Just until the storm passes. I will not hurt them, I promise. I have nothing left to hurt anyone with. Please, I just need to rest." He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth or rise to drive me from his den. He simply watched me with those ancient amber eyes, and I saw something flicker in their depths, something that looked almost like understanding. Then, slowly, deliberately, he shifted his great body to the side. The movement was small but unmistakable, creating a space between him and the cave wall, a hollow where warmth gathered and the wind could not reach, a space just large enough for a woman to rest. He was making room for me. The tears came before I could stop them, sudden and violent, tearing through my chest like sobs from a wounded child. I pressed my ruined hand against my mouth to muffle the sound, terrified of waking the pups, but the grief poured out of me in waves I could not control. It crashed through the walls I had built around my heart, flooded the hollow places where my family used to live, and swept away years of carefully constructed numbness until I was raw and open and trembling with the force of everything I had tried so hard not to feel. No one had made room for me in 5 years. No one had offered me a place beside them since the fire took my family and my face and my future. I had asked permission to exist in so many spaces, from market corners to temple steps to the edges of fields where I begged for work, and always the answer was the same. A turned back, a closed door, a silence that said more clearly than words that I did not belong, that my presence was unwanted, that the world would be better if I simply ceased to exist. I had learned to expect rejection the way I expected the sun to rise, and I had stopped hoping for anything else. But this creature, this scarred king who owed me nothing, who had every reason to see me as a threat to his children and drive me into the storm to die, had answered differently. He had given me the one thing I had stopped believing anyone would ever give me again: a place to belong. I crawled into the space he offered, my limbs shaking, my vision blurred with tears that would not stop falling. I pressed my back against the stone wall and felt the warmth of his body radiate toward me like a hearth I had forgotten existed. The stone was cold, but the air was not, warmed by the breath of the wolves and the strange magic of this ancient place. I pulled my knees to my chest and wrapped my arms around them and wept until there was nothing left inside me. Until the storm outside faded to a distant roar, and my breathing slowed to match the gentle rhythm of the sleeping pups. When I woke, pale morning light filled the cave entrance and the storm had passed. The world outside was silent and white, buried under fresh snow that sparkled like scattered diamonds in the early sun. But it was not the beauty of the morning that stole my breath. It was the warmth that surrounded me, the weight of small bodies pressed against my own. The 3 pups had migrated during the night, drawn perhaps by the heat of another body or some instinct older than thought. They had left their father's side and come to me, and now they lay curled against my legs and stomach in a pile of white fur and gentle breathing. One had nestled its nose into the crook of my elbow, its small body rising and falling with peaceful sleep. Another had stretched across my thigh, its paws twitching as it chased something in its dreams. The third, the smallest one, had burrowed beneath my cloak and pressed itself against my heart, and I could feel its tiny heartbeat fluttering against my chest like a captured bird. I held my breath, afraid to move, afraid to shatter whatever strange magic had allowed this moment to exist. My scarred hand hovered over the smallest pup, trembling, wanting to touch but terrified of waking it, of breaking the spell. Across the cave, the great white wolf watched me. His amber eyes held no accusation, no warning. If anything, I saw in them something I had never expected to see in the gaze of a beast. Recognition, understanding, a grief that mirrored my own. He knew what it meant to be alone. He knew what it meant to carry scars that others could not look upon without flinching. He knew what it meant to lose everyone you loved and still have to keep breathing, keep living, keep protecting what little remained. And he had chosen, in some way I could not fully comprehend, to let his children find comfort in my presence. He had decided that I was safe, that I belonged. I stayed that day and the next, telling myself I was only waiting for my strength to return. I melted snow for water in my cupped hands and shared the dried herbs I had carried in my grandmother's pouch. The pups grew bolder as the hours passed, sniffing at my fingers, tugging at my cloak with their tiny teeth, tumbling over each other in clumsy play that made something long dormant stir in my chest. Laughter, joy. The feelings I thought the fire had burned away forever. The smallest pup, a female with a splash of silver on her ear that reminded me of moonlight on water, took to following me whenever I moved within the cave. She would sit at my feet and watch me with her father's eyes, her head tilted in curiosity, her tail wagging hopefully whenever I looked her way. I began to speak to her the way I once spoke to my younger sister, in soft tones full of nonsense and affection, telling her about the herbs I carried, and the songs my grandmother used to sing, and the dreams I used to have before the fire took them away. The great wolf came and went as the days passed, hunting in the frozen forest and returning with prey he dropped near the cave entrance, rabbits mostly, and once a young deer that fed us all for days. He never ate until the pups had finished, standing guard at the entrance while they tore into the meat with their small, sharp teeth. And he never slept until I had settled against the wall for the night, his amber eyes watching over all of us with a vigilance that never wavered. I realized slowly, with a wonder that grew each day, that he was including me in his watch. He was protecting me as he protected his young, counting me among the precious things that needed guarding. The understanding made my throat tight with emotions I had no name for. On the fifth night, he came to me. I was sitting near the cave entrance, watching the stars emerge through the thinning clouds, my cloak wrapped tight around my shoulders. The pups had fallen asleep in their usual pile, their bellies full and their breathing peaceful. I was thinking about my grandmother, remembering the stories she told about the guardians of the forest, when I felt his presence at my side. He lowered his great body to the ground beside me, close enough that his fur brushed my arm, and together we watched the sky in silence. His breathing was slow and deep, a rhythm that seemed to echo the pulse of the mountain itself. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out to the darkness. I found myself leaning into his warmth without meaning to, my shoulder pressing against his, and he did not pull away. He pressed back, just slightly, an acknowledgement of my presence, an acceptance of my touch. "You lost her," I said quietly, the words rising up from somewhere deep inside me. "Your mate. The village men boast about it sometimes, when they drink too much and want to feel powerful. I heard them once, laughing about the white pelt they sold to a merchant from the south. They were proud of what they did." I am sorry. I am so sorry for what they took from you." He turned his head and looked at me, and in his amber eyes I saw a grief that mirrored my own. We had both lost everything that mattered. We had both been marked by violence and left behind to survive in a world that did not want us. And now, somehow, in this cave at the edge of the world, we had found each other. I reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and rested my scarred hand on his shoulder. His fur was thick and soft beneath my fingers, warm with life and vitality. He pressed into my touch, leaning his weight against my palm, and a sound rumbled from his chest. Not a growl. Something softer, something that felt like acceptance. The hunters came on the 7th day, when the sun was high and the snow had begun to melt in patches, revealing dark earth beneath. I heard them before I saw them, their voices carrying through the frozen air with the carelessness of men who believed themselves alone in the wilderness. They were loud and laughing, making jokes about the fortune they would claim. There were 4 of them, armed with spears and bows, and the cruelty of those who see nature as something to be conquered. Their eyes scanned the snowdrifts for tracks, following the trail that led to the cave, and I knew with a cold certainty why they had come. White wolf pelts fetched fortunes in the southern markets, and 3 pups would be worth even more, their fur unmarked by scars, their meat considered a delicacy by those with twisted appetites. I gathered the pups and pushed them deeper into the cave, my heart hammering against my ribs. They whimpered at my urgency, confused by the sudden fear in my movements, but they let me guide them into the shadows. The great wolf stood at the entrance, his hackles raised, his teeth bared, a low growl building in his throat. He would fight, I knew. He would fight to the death to protect his children. But there were 4 of them with weapons, and I had seen what hunters could do. I did not think. I simply moved. I walked out of the cave and stood in the snow before them, my scarred face bare to the winter light, my hands empty and raised. The hunters stopped in their tracks, shock registering on their faces as they recognized me. The burned woman, the village ghost, the cursed one. "Go back," I said, and my voice did not shake. "There is nothing here for you. The wolves are under my protection, and you will not touch them." One of the hunters laughed. "Your protection? What protection can a scarred wretch like you offer? Stand aside or share their fate." But the oldest hunter, a man with gray in his beard, held up his hand. He was staring at me with fear and recognition. He had been a friend of my grandfather, long ago. The mark on her hand, he said quietly, "Look at it." I looked down at my scarred hand, the one I always kept hidden, and saw what the firelight had never revealed. The scar tissue had formed a pattern. A wolf. A white wolf, formed from the very burns that had marked me as an outcast. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. "Our bloodline has always served the guardians of the forest. When the time comes, you will know." "I am the keeper," I said, and the words felt true. "I am the daughter of the old line. These wolves are under my oath. If you harm them, the forest itself will remember. It will not forgive." The hunters exchanged glances. I saw fear in their eyes now, the primal fear of men confronted with something older than their weapons. The oldest hunter lowered his bow first, then turned and walked away. One by one, the others followed, casting glances over their shoulders as they retreated into the trees. I stood in the snow until they vanished from sight. Then my legs gave out, and I sank into the drift, trembling with terror and strange new power. The great wolf emerged from the cave and pressed his nose against my cheek. Behind him, 3 small shapes tumbled out, their tails wagging. The smallest one climbed into my lap and licked the tears from my chin, and I laughed through my weeping. I returned to the village one final time to gather my grandmother's things. Beneath the wreckage of my cabin, I found her journal, wrapped in oilcloth, filled with the knowledge of generations, recipes for healing, maps of sacred places, and the story of our bloodline, The women who kept the old promises. I was not cursed. I was chosen, marked by fire so I would find my way to those who needed me most. When spring came, I had built a new cabin deeper in the forest, near a stream that sang over stones and a meadow where the pups could run. The great wolf came and went as he pleased, sometimes vanishing for days, sometimes sleeping beside my fire. The village left us alone. Word had spread, and fear kept them away. I became what my grandmother had been, a healer who walked the boundary between worlds. Villagers left offerings at the forest's edge, and I left medicines in return. I never entered their world again, and they never entered mine. But we existed in peace. The pups grew into wolves nearly as large as their father. The female with silver on her ear became my shadow, my companion. The sister I had lost reborn in a form I never expected. On the anniversary of the night I found the cave, the great wolf brought me a gift. A stone, smooth and white, from a river I had never seen. He dropped it at my feet and looked at me with those amber eyes, and I understood. I was pack. I was family. I picked up the stone and held it against my heart, and for the first time since the fire, I felt whole. The scars on my face have not faded. They never will. But I no longer hide them, no longer turn away in shame when the sunlight catches them. They are the map of my journey, the proof that I survived long enough to find where I belonged, the testament to every fire I walked through to reach this sacred ground. And when I walk through the forest now, with white wolves at my side and ancient trees whispering secrets in the wind, I know with every fiber of my being that I am exactly where I was always meant to be. Sometimes the great wolf and I still sit together at the cave entrance, watching the stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance. His muzzle has grown grayer with the passing seasons, but his eyes remain as amber and watchful as the night I first saw them. We do not need words between us. We never did. Our scars speak a language older than speech, and our silence holds more understanding than a lifetime of conversation ever could. They said the scarred ones carry death in their skin. But I carry life now, wild and fierce and gloriously free. I carry a family that chose me when the world turned away, a purpose that found me in my darkest hour, a love that defied everything humanity tried to teach me about my own worth. And I will guard it all with everything I have, with every breath and every heartbeat, until my spirit finally slips free and runs with the wolves forever through forests that have no end.